We are here with Michael Pollock, who is the managing director of Spectrum Gaming Group, which is literally a group of companies today that Mike can describe for us in a minute. Mike, the first thing I want to say to you is that, like you, for many years I had a beard. More recently, I've been shaving. And in order to be neat and professional for our Zoom meeting this morning, I shaved, and of course I nicked myself. So now I just totally undermine my purpose.
That's why I don't shave.
Right, good move. Mike, I did start by saying you are now a group of companies. Describe Spectrum Gaming to us.
Well, Frank, Spectrum's been around for more than a quarter century at this point, and we've recognized over the years, particularly in recent years, that the gaming industry, the global gaming industry, is evolving rapidly, as you know better than anyone. And the gaming industry is also maturing. So there's a lot of new verticals coming up in gaming. And there's a lot of new services that a mature industry requires that an emerging industry doesn't necessarily require. With the new verticals, be that lottery, be that sports betting, be that iGaming and iLottery and esports and so forth, as well as the convergence of several industries, lotteries and casinos, gaming and other forms of hospitality, that has required us to get ahead of the game and develop new verticals, new umbrella organizations that can address a growing array of needs.
And you have, if I look at our list, you've got, in addition to your umbrella Spectrum Gaming Group, you have Gaming Capital, Spectrum Asia, Spectrum Gaming Sports Group, Spectrum Gaming Hospitality, Spectrum Esports Advisors, and NFC Global. And most of those are self-explanatory, but I don't know that I understand NFC Global. What is that?
NFC Global is we own the majority owner of NFC Global, and they do background investigations. They do more than gaming, which is why their name is not simply gaming. They do work for banking, insurance, a lot of other industries. But that's the entity that we rely on for most of our background investigations, which is a core part of our business.
Okay, great. This is 2020, so we can't get away without talking about COVID. What kind of challenges or opportunities do you see COVID presenting to the gaming industry?
Well, it's interesting because no one could have anticipated that there would have been a point in time in this calendar year 2020 when I'm just looking at the U.S. For a moment, that 1,000 casinos roughly would be closed. You couldn't conceive of a scenario in which that occurred. The flip side of that, as we have learned, as casinos have slowly reopened and have learned from this pandemic, is that they've rebounded a lot better in many instances than was anticipated. So the industry has learned something that it never really had a need to learn before with respect to this pandemic and what it means to reopen and so forth. And I mean that in a couple of key areas. That the revenues that have most casinos have been able to recapture in recent months tended to exceed expectations, as you well know. And part of that is because, certainly in terms of profitability, because when you have limited options and you can only open a certain portion of your capacity, obviously the operators are going to tend to look for the higher value customer and generally extend their marketing and promotions to those higher value customers at peak periods. So consequently, you're able to focus more on your higher value customers. And I also note that a lot of operators are learning that they are able to get by with fewer FTEs than they had before. So consequently, they're able to generate or spend less to generate an equivalent amount of revenue. That's also what we've learned. But I think also probably the key lesson, Frank, with respect to where we are in the fourth quarter of 2020, with the pandemic not in our rearview mirror by any means, is that many states have been seriously hampered by a lack of revenue, particularly casino revenue. As you and I discussed, and I know we discussed this in our last session, roughly a year ago, is that when states are having fiscal problems, they tend to round up the usual suspect, i.e. the casino industry, as how can they tap into gaming more to generate more revenue. That's essentially been the case, but it's not just casinos, it's not just, it's also lotteries, and it's also states looking to new verticals. That's why we have seen a significant push with respect to digital sports betting and iGaming, and we are also seeing iLottery. So you're getting states are effectively looking at these new verticals as a way to generate revenue that are particularly attractive during a pandemic, which is true. But there are obviously issues that they need to be aware of doing that.
The new verticals, the new states seeking new forms of revenue are among the topics that you discuss in your annual 10 trends to look for in the coming year. But what are some of those other trends that you've identified?
Well, there's a number of them, and I think the most important probably have to deal with things that were essentially not anticipated in previous years. They're really not focused on. For example, that more North American lotteries are contemplating and developing digital offerings. As we have noted over a number of years, there's been a long-term trend, but it's been highlighted recently, is that lotteries are moving into the digital space in a big way. That's not surprising, that's not unexpected, and that's truly not unwelcome, because a lottery is such a major consumer-facing industry that do not have to be able to sell its products digitally is not going to happen. It's really not thinkable. The real issue, though, is how are they going to merge with the gaming industry and not compete necessarily against the gaming industry. That's something that we're seeing quite heavily, and it's quite important. We're seeing it roll out in a number of states, and that's going to be a 40-plus state issue, because you have a lot of states that have both, obviously, land-based casinos and lotteries. They're going to have to deal with that issue.
One of the things that you talk about, this certain amount of contention or tension between the casino industry and perhaps lotteries. Even within the casino industry, or within the commercial gaming industry, we're seeing some of this. You've got people who are advocating that the gray machines that are in fraternal organizations and veterans halls be legalized and essentially create competition for casinos. At least they have in a model like Illinois. How do you see that issue playing out?
I think, again, that's going to be a multi-state issue. And legislators, and we work with legislators regularly. As you know, we're the director of the National Council of Legislators from Gaming States, which is devoted to best practices in gaming legislation and regulation. And legislators don't quite understand. They need to be educated effectively as to what that means for their gaming industry. On one level, it certainly means cannibalization, because you're essentially giving people an alternative way to spend their discretionary dollars in a very similar fashion. But I think it also gets to the heart of what the legal gaming industry is all about in the United States, and frankly around the world, and that these are licensed entities that recognize that a gaming license is a privilege, not a right. Privilege that comes with those who have affirmatively demonstrated and continue to demonstrate good character, honesty, and integrity. Consequently, a license in gaming means something. It means that level of public trust. So absent that same standard being applied to all forms of gaming, that creates a serious dilemma for states they need to be aware of. And they would generally agree with that principle. but you got to make them aware of that principle.
Right. One of your trends is to look for in 2021 is Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And as you may know, I've long been of the opinion for years that it's not easy to get casinos in Japan politically. A two-part question. One, in terms of Asia. One is what's your outlook for Japan in the coming year? And secondly, we see the national government in China talking about, it sounds like prohibiting international casino companies from marketing their players. And I'm not sure whether that means directly on the ground, as in junkets, or whether that means marketing, period. You know, don't send my citizen a mailer to visit South Korea next week. So two-part question. First, what do you see for Japan? And secondly, do you have any thoughts as to what China is doing and what those ramifications may be to all those countries in the Far East now that are trying to develop multi-billion-dollar casino industries?
Well, Frank, Spectrum has had a long-standing presence in Japan. We've worked, we've sent teams there. I've been there several times. We have a full-time presence in Japan. We have had one for a long time. My partner, Fred Gustin, has been leading that effort. But again, many of us at Spectrum have gone there several times to essentially provide some level of guidance to them as to how to do it right, recognizing that in any jurisdiction, national, state, or otherwise, you get one chance to do it right. And for the most part, the audience and the reception to that has been positive. They recognize, they look to Singapore, for example, as a model as to how gaming can be done right. And we have very proud of the work we've done in Singapore over a period of years, even helping them to launch gaming and do it in a way that meets global standards, again, for integrity, anti-money laundering, public policy in terms of capital investment, and so forth. So the fact that Japan has gone slowly I think is in part a reflection that Japan is a Western-style democracy, like many other Western-style democracies, and there's going to be forces for and against. But it's not particularly troubling in the sense that there's a recognition that, and we've seen this in going back almost half a century, that once you authorize gaming and it's legal and it's operational, there's no going back. At that point, there's no more opposition to it theoretically. So the opposition ends once it becomes legal. And that's probably going to happen. I am not the one necessarily that Spectrum has the best idea as to when that's going to happen. But as long as they're moving in a direction where they're going to do it right, and that means doing it to capture the greatest capital investment, greatest employment, tourism growth, and other policy goals, that's fine. Take your time. There's nothing wrong with that. In general, in any jurisdiction, it's better to do it right than to do it quickly. There is a lot of impatience for that, but that's generally correct. Now, China is obviously a different form of government, different type of market, and there's risk associated with operating in an environment where the government is not obviously a Western-style democracy, and those are risks that are there. And to a certain degree, that presents opportunities for other markets in Asia. But at the same time, it just means that the China market may not be as lucrative in the future as it has been in the past.
One of the things I wonder is whether they consider Macau international, because if they limit marketing to Chinese from Korea, the Philippines, Singapore, etc., but do not limit it in Macau because it is a special administrative region of China, that obviously is to the benefit of the Macau operators. But if they consider Macau similar to and treat them the same as those other countries, then that inhibits the ability of the Macau casinos to draw those mainland Chinese.
Yeah, and it's a fair question, a fair observation, and it's certainly a risk factor. But I am not in the business of, in any sense, prognosticating what the Chinese government is going to do. But that does have implications for other operators. Now, as you know, in Korea, for example, the foreign investment is limited to casinos that for foreign passport holders only. That creates its own set of dilemmas, frankly, because once Japan, if and when Japan becomes operational, I think it's a when rather than an if, that's going to create problems for Korea. So the markets are very much interrelated in Asia. There may come a point, Korea, just it's kind of the flip side of what you're talking about, that they may open up the newer casinos to Korean nationals. As you know, there's only one casino in Korea, and I'm not sure where that stands in terms of how it's opened or not during the pandemic. I've been to that casino, and extraordinarily busy. So there may be opportunities there. But again, and it's no different than what we see in North America, that what happens in one market can have a cascading effect on policies in other markets.
Maybe we'll close out, Mike, with a broader view. Looking beyond 2021, if you were to take your crystal ball out and look at what the gaming industry might appear like 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, what do you think it will look like?
Well, I love that question, because there's something I said, this is obviously said this pre-pandemic, and I will say it post-pandemic, that two factors that are going to guide the future of the gaming industry, amongst others, but two major factors. One is that humans are pre-wired to like games of chance. That's just who we are. Another is that we like to participate in social settings. With those two factors in mind, there's always going to be a place for land-based gaming operators. And I believe it's going to be more to the benefit of the US type of casino operation than, let's say, to these smaller European type of models. The digital forms of gaming are going to continue to be there. There's no question about that. But they're going to be used more and more as to what what their core value is. And that is as a way to gamble, but also as a means to get them physically into casinos. I believe that's going to be the factor. And just to put this in perspective, very proud of the fact that we noted that about 18 years ago, when we first looked at how land-based casinos would respond to the growth of this new phenomenon known as the internet. And we said they're going to go from pure rejection, which they did, to acceptance, to embrace. And we're following along that continuum.
Okay.
So that's where it's going to be. I think the land-based industry is going to be there. There'll be probably more of them, but there are also another factor is they're also going to be much broader in their offerings. And that means more of a focus than we now see on non-gaming offering.
Well, Mike, as always, a lot of really great insight from the head of one of the industry's biggest and best consultancies and research firms. So we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Frank.